My name is Samantha Hayes, and I'm 27 years old. If you asked me to describe my life, I wouldn't give you a resume. I'd give you a song, a slow, aching jazz ballad with moments of sudden brightness, and notes only I seem to understand. I live in Portland, Oregon, where the rain falls almost every day and the air smells like coffee and wet pine. My world is small, a one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore, a guitar propped against the wall, and sheet music scattered across the kitchen table. My family calls me a dreamer. They mean it as an insult. My sister is a lawyer in Seattle. My brother writes code in Silicon Valley. My parents are proud of both of them. And me? I write songs no one in my family listens to except for two people. My grandparents. They're the only ones who ever believed. I grew up on the rainy side of Portland, in a modest two-story house with chipped blue paint and a porch that creaked when you stepped on the wrong board. The backyard was a tangle of blackberry bushes, and on summer evenings, I'd sit under the old cedar tree, listening to my grandfather's trumpet drifting through the open window. Grandpa Thomas wasn't famous. He'd played in smoky jazz bars in Chicago back in the 70s before settling down here with my grandmother Margaret, a retired nurse who still smelled faintly of lavender soap. They weren't flashy people, but they had a quiet magic about them. Grandpa's hands were rough from years of holding the trumpet, and whenever he played, the air felt warmer, even in winter. I was 8 when I wrote my first melody. It wasn't much, just a handful of clumsy notes I scribbled on the back of my math homework, but Grandpa treated it like a masterpiece. "Sam," he told me, "music isn't just something you hear, it's something you carry. If you keep it close, it'll carry you right back." My parents never understood that. Dad managed a lumber supply company. Mom taught chemistry at the local high school. To them, success came in spreadsheets and diplomas, not in songs that no one had asked for. My older sister, Victoria, was their golden child debate team captain, straight-A student, destined for law school before she could even drive. My younger brother, Ethan, was the prodigy in the making, programming his first app at 12 and landing summer internships in Silicon Valley before college. And then there was me, the creative one. The label sounded kind, but it was always followed by a sigh. Dinner conversations were competitions I could never win. Victoria would talk about mock trials and scholarships. Ethan would discuss algorithms and robotics projects. My parents' faces lit up with pride, nodding at every achievement. Then they'd turn to me, and I'd tell them I was working on a new song inspired by the rain sliding down my bedroom window. The silence afterward was deafening. Sometimes Dad would say, "That's nice, Sam. But what about your grades?" Other times, Mom would press her lips together, as if she was holding back the question she really wanted to ask. "When will you get serious?" It wasn't that they didn't love me. They just didn't see music as a future, more like a phase I'd grow out of. But Grandpa and Grandma saw me differently. They'd let me stay over on weekends, and Grandpa would pull out his old records, Miles Davis, Chet Baker, Ella Fitzgerald. We'd sit in the living room, the turntable crackling, and he'd teach me how to hear the spaces between the notes. Looking back, I realized those nights were my real education. Not in scales or theory, but in permission. Permission to dream in a family that preferred straight lines over improvisation. By the time I turned 18, the pressure in my house was a constant hum, like the buzz of fluorescent lights you can't switch off. College brochures began stacking up on the kitchen counter. Engineering programs, business schools, even a packet from the University of Washington's pre-law track, which Victoria had mailed me, just in case. I'd smile politely, take the pamphlets to my room, and shove them in the back of my desk drawer. What I didn't tell anyone was that I'd already made up my mind. The idea of sitting in lecture halls, memorizing formulas I didn't care about, felt like putting my heart in a box and sealing it shut. Music wasn't just what I loved, it was the only thing that made sense to me. I'd been writing songs late into the night. My fingers sore, my notebooks filling with verses and chord progressions. Some mornings I'd wake up with new melodies still echoing in my head, as if they'd been waiting for me in my dreams. The moment came one Sunday morning over breakfast. Mom had made pancakes. The air smelled of coffee, and my parents were in unusually good moods. Victoria was visiting from Seattle, talking about a case her firm had just won. Ethan was scrolling through something on his laptop, probably coding. I took a breath and said it. I'm not going to college. The room went still. Dad set down his mug. What? I'm going to focus on my music. I'll get a part-time job to pay rent, but I'm not applying to any schools. My voice shook, but I forced myself to meet their eyes. Mom blinked twice, like she was making sure she'd heard me right. Samantha, be serious. You can't make a living playing songs in your bedroom. You need a degree. I don't want a degree. I want a career in music. Victoria leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Sam, I'm telling you this as your sister. I've seen people chase art and end up broke, living with their parents at 30. You're too smart to throw your future away. Ethan didn't say anything. He just kept typing, but I could feel him listening. Dad's voice rose. If you skip college, you're making the worst mistake of your life. And if you think you can live here while you figure it out, think again. This isn't a free ride. That was it. The line in the sand. 2 weeks later, I left. I packed my guitar, a duffel bag of clothes, and the $380 I'd saved from babysitting and a summer job at the farmer's market. I rented a tiny studio above a bookstore downtown. The floorboards creaked, the heater rattled, and the only view was a brick wall, but it was mine. During the day, I waited tables at a cafe. At night, I wrote music until my fingers cramped. No applause, no record deals, just me and the songs. And for the first time, even with all the uncertainty, I felt free. The first 2 years on my own were a blur of exhaustion and instant noodles. My apartment smelled permanently of burnt coffee from the cafe downstairs. The rent took up nearly everything I earned waiting tables, and the rest went to guitar strings, cheap recording equipment, and the occasional bag of groceries that wasn't pasta or peanut butter. Most nights, after closing shifts, I'd climb the narrow stairs to my studio, kick off my shoes, and sit cross-legged on the floor with my guitar. The street lamp outside my window flickered like a heartbeat, and I'd play until my voice was hoarse. Sometimes I recorded demos on my old laptop, but most of those files never saw the light of day. I'd tell myself, next one will be better. My parents called often, or rather, my mom did. The conversations were always the same. Sam, are you eating? Are you still doing the music thing? Yes, Mom. You could come home, take some classes. No, Mom. Dad's calls were shorter. You find a real job yet? Even Ethan, who rarely gave opinions, texted once. You're smart enough to do something else, you know. The only voices that didn't try to steer me off course were my grandparents. Grandpa would call from their landline, his voice crackling with static. You're on the right road, Sam. Roads like this are never paved. Grandma sent me care packages, coffee beans, oatmeal cookies, sometimes $20 tucked between the pages of a paperback. Then, one cold January night, everything changed. I was coming home from work, my breath visible in the icy air, when my phone buzzed. It was Grandma. Her voice shook. Sam, it's your grandpa. He had a heart attack. They're taking him to St. Mary's. I didn't even lock the door to my apartment. I ran to the bus stop, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. By the time I reached the hospital, Grandma was sitting alone in the waiting room, her eyes red. The doctor's words were short. Merciless. He didn't make it. The funeral was small, held in a church with creaky pews and stained glass windows. I played a simple hymn on my guitar, but my hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the pick. That night, I went back to my apartment and pulled out my notebook. I started writing without thinking, pouring every memory of Grandpa into the melody, the way his trumpet sounded on rainy nights, the smell of his aftershave, the warmth in his laugh. I called it Trumpet in the Rain. I posted a rough recording online, not expecting anything. A week later, my inbox exploded. Musicians wanted to collaborate. An indie singer from Seattle asked to record it. And when the song went live on her album, something wild happened. People listened, a lot of people. For the first time, strangers were singing my words back to me. Trumpet in the Rain didn't just open a door, it blew the hinges off. The indie singer's version started popping up on playlists I didn't even know existed. I'd be wiping tables at the cafe when a customer's phone would ring and my song would drift out in the background. The first time it happened, I froze, the plate in my hand hovering midair. Within a month, a small record label reached out, asking if I'd write for one of their new artists. The pay was more than I made in 2 months at the cafe. I said yes, and pulled 3 all-nighters to deliver the track. When it released, it quietly racked up streams in the hundreds of thousands. The work snowballed. Bands from Austin, folk duos from Denver, pop singers from Los Angeles, my inbox turned into a patchwork of accents and time zones. They didn't want Samantha Hayes. They wanted Rain Miller, the pseudonym I'd chosen in a quiet nod to my grandfather and that first song. Why the secrecy? At first it was fear. I didn't want my family to know, only to shrug it off or call it luck. Later, it became a shield. The less they knew, the less they could tear apart. I learned how to negotiate contracts from YouTube tutorials and late-night Google searches. I built a network of session musicians, producers, and even a lawyer I paid per email. I stopped measuring my worth in tips and started tracking it in royalties. 3 years in, my bank account crossed into 6 figures. By year 5, I had more money than I'd ever imagined, over 8 figures actually. I upgraded my guitar, my recording setup, and my apartment, but only slightly. Still 1 bedroom, still above the bookstore. If my parents ever visited, I wanted it to look like I was just scraping by. The only person I let into the truth was Grandma. I'd visit her every week, bringing vinyl records and blueberry scones. She'd sit in her rocking chair, listening to Ella Fitzgerald or Chet Baker, her eyes shining. "You've done it, Sam," she'd say. "Your grandpa would be proud." But even those visits started to change. She'd forget which record was playing, ask me the same question 3 times in an hour. The day she called me Margaret, her own name, I knew something was wrong. The diagnosis came a month later: early-stage Alzheimer's. That night, sitting at my desk with the city lights blurring in my eyes, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let her fade away in some sterile room under the care of strangers. She deserved music, warmth, the kind of life she'd given me in those weekends with Grandpa. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew it would be big. The idea came to me one night while I was listening to Kind of Blue in the dark, the hum of my amp filling the spaces between the trumpet lines. I thought about Grandma in her little house, the same one she'd lived in for 40 years, with its steep stairs, cluttered kitchen, and no one there after dusk. I could already see the next few years if I did nothing, her memory slipping further, small mistakes turning into dangerous ones. I remembered how she'd once left the oven on for an entire afternoon. It wasn't going to get better, so I decided to make it better myself. First, the house. I called Claire, my assistant, confidant, and part-time miracle worker, and told her to start looking for a property outside the city. I wanted space, light, gardens, somewhere quiet, with a view that could change with the seasons. It had to feel like home the second you stepped in, but it also had to be safe: no stairs without railings, wide doorways for easy access, a bathroom that wouldn't be a hazard. After 3 weeks of touring overpriced shells and lifeless McMansions, we found it. A weathered 3-story estate in West Lynn, built in the 1920s. The roof was deep red tile, the walls creamy stucco, the garden full of tangled roses and towering maples. It needed love, but I could see the end result in my mind: the music room with a baby grand piano, the lounge lined with Grandpa's records, the patio where Grandma could sip tea on sunny mornings. I bought it outright, no loans. The renovation was my obsession. I hired an architect who'd worked on historic homes, interior designers who understood both elegance and practicality. We built an elevator so Grandma wouldn't need to climb stairs. Her bedroom had wide windows overlooking the garden, a quilted reading chair in the corner, and a bookshelf filled with her favorite novels, even if she might forget she'd read them. But there was one more idea, one that had been lodged in the back of my mind since I was 22. On my birthday that year, I'd splurged on a helicopter ride over the Columbia River Gorge. The view had stunned me: water like glass, mountains rising like guardians, clouds spilling over the ridges. I'd come home and written a song that very night. If that kind of view could inspire me, maybe it could wake something in Grandma, even for a moment. So I called an aviation company and bought a sleek black Bell 407. Room for me, Grandma, and a nurse. I took lessons, but I'd always fly with a professional pilot. Every part of the plan was done in secret. Not a word to my parents. Not a hint to Victoria or Ethan. They wouldn't understand. They'd find out when it was time. And when they did, they'd never see me the same way again. The call came on a Thursday night while I was reviewing paint swatches for the music room. It was Mom. Her voice was clipped, the way it gets when she's trying to sound calm but isn't. "Sam, we need a family meeting this weekend. It's about your grandmother." My stomach tightened. "What's going on?" "We'll talk in person." She hung up before I could press further. On Saturday, I drove my old Subaru to my parents' house in Beaverton. Autumn had set in, the kind of sharp, damp air that smells of cedar and wet leaves. I walked in to find the usual scene. Dad in his recliner with the newspaper, Victoria in a tailored blazer like she'd stepped out of a courtroom, Ethan glued to his phone. Grandma sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the carpet. We started with small talk, or rather, they talked, and I listened. Then Mom cleared her throat. "It's about Grandma. Her memory's slipping faster. Last week she left the stove on all night. We can't risk her living alone anymore." I nodded slowly. I agree she shouldn't be alone. Which is why, Dad cut me off. We've found a nursing home in Hillsborough. Clean, modern, affordable. We'll split the cost. Victoria nodded without hesitation. "It's the best option. I don't have time to be driving back and forth from Seattle." Ethan shrugged. "Same here. I'm in San Jose. Not practical for me to help." They kept talking like Grandma wasn't in the room. She just kept staring at the carpet, her knuckles white. I took a deep breath. She doesn't want a nursing home. She wants to stay with family. I can take care of her. Dad gave a short, humorless laugh. "You? Sam, you can barely take care of yourself. What would you pay for her care with? Tips from the cafe?" Victoria smirked. "This is serious. You can't just play guitar at her bedside and call it care." Ethan didn't smirk, but his voice was condescending. "We know you love her, but let's be realistic." Mom sighed, her eyes softening. "Sam, honey, you don't understand how much work it is. It's a burden. Professionals know how to handle it." Their words weren't just dismissals, they were echoes of every time they'd told me I wasn't enough. I glanced at Grandma. She met my eyes, and for a flicker of a second, I saw recognition. I stood, my voice steady but my pulse racing. "You can all do what you want, but I'm taking care of her. My way." Dad rolled his eyes. "Don't make promises you can't keep." I reached for my phone, scrolled to Claire's number, and hit call. "Claire, get the helicopter ready. Bring it to the field near my parents' house." The room went silent. Then they laughed, actually laughed, like I'd just told the punchline of a bad joke. That was fine. In a few hours, they wouldn't be laughing. The October wind was sharp enough to sting my cheeks as I walked out of my parents' house. My heart hammered in my chest, not from the chill, but from what I was about to do. The field was only 3 blocks away, a worn patch of grass where kids played soccer in the summer. I stood there, hands deep in my jacket pockets, scanning the gray sky. Claire had said 20 minutes. Back at the house, I could see them through the window, my parents, Victoria and Ethan, leaning toward each other, no doubt tearing my grand plan apart. Let them. In less than an hour, they'd see exactly who I'd become. The sound came first low and distant, like a faraway drum roll. Then it grew louder, a steady roar that vibrated in my ribs. Heads turned along the street. A sleek black Bell 407 emerged over the tree line, sunlight glinting off its polished body. My pulse spiked. The helicopter descended gracefully, rotor wash whipping up leaves in a golden-brown cyclone. Kids from the neighborhood ran over, their voices rising in awe. The skids touched down, the engine a controlled thunder. My family spilled out of the house, drawn by the noise. Dad was first, his jaw set tight. "What the hell is this?" Mom clutched her sweater to her chest, eyes wide. Victoria stopped mid-step, her phone slipping from her hand. Ethan froze on the sidewalk, earbuds dangling around his neck. I walked straight past them and into the house to get Grandma. She was in her armchair, dozing. I knelt beside her. "Grandma, it's Sam. We're going for a little ride." Her eyes fluttered open. "In the car?" I smiled. "Better." The nurse I'd hired weeks ago without telling anyone met us at the door. Together, we helped Grandma outside. The moment she saw the helicopter, her lips parted in surprise. Oh my. Thomas would have loved this. I know, I said, my throat tightening. We got her seated inside, headset on, hands resting gently on her lap. I turned to the others. Mom, Dad, you're coming. Victoria, Ethan, follow us in the car. I'll text you the address. They hesitated, but curiosity overpowered pride. My parents climbed in, their expressions a tangled knot of skepticism and disbelief. The door closed with a solid thunk. The rotors whirred faster, and then we were rising, the field shrinking beneath us, houses becoming neat little squares. Grandma gasped softly, pointing to the Willamette River snaking silver through the city. It's beautiful, Sam. I glanced at my parents. Mom's knuckles were white on the seatbelt. Dad kept darting glances at me like he was still trying to figure out what game I was playing. Where are we going? He finally asked over the headset. You'll see. We flew south, skimming over forests blazing with autumn color. Grandma spotted the mountains in the distance, snow already frosting the peaks. For a moment, she seemed younger, her eyes clearer, her smile unburdened. 20 minutes later, we banked east, and the estate came into view. The renovated mansion gleamed cream against the deep green of the gardens. The red-tiled roof shone in the sun, and the maples lining the driveway swayed like they were welcoming us home. We touched down in the backyard, next to a newly paved helipad. The pilot shut down the engine, and the sudden quiet felt almost unreal. Ethan and Victoria arrived moments later in Victoria's spotless Tesla. They stepped out, staring at the house like it had been airdropped from another planet. "Whose place is this?" Victoria asked, her voice sharper than the wind. I didn't answer. Instead, I helped Grandma out of the helicopter and led her through the back garden. Roses planted to match the ones from her old house framed the walkway. The smell hit her, and she stopped, closing her eyes. It smells like home. Inside, the foyer's polished wood gleamed. A chandelier threw warm light over the cream walls. And in the corner of the living room, on a stand of dark walnut, sat Grandpa's trumpet. Grandma reached for it with trembling hands. Thomas's. I nodded. "This is your home now, Grandma." Ours. Silence. Then Dad's voice, low and wary. "Sam, what is this? How could you—" I turned to face them all. For the past 6 years, I've been writing music under the name Rain Miller. Trumpet in the Rain? That was mine. So were dozens of other songs you've heard on the radio, in commercials, in movies. I've earned over $25 million in royalties and investments. I bought this house, the helicopter, the staff, all for Grandma. Their faces froze disbelief, shock, something else I couldn't name. Mom covered her mouth, tears welling. "Sam, why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never believed I could do it. I wanted you to see it, not hear about it." Dad stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck. I was wrong. About everything. Victoria, for once, had no comeback. "You wrote Trumpet in the Rain?" she whispered. "Sam, it's beautiful." Ethan's eyes were wet. "I've been writing songs too. I just never told anyone." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Then maybe it's time you did." Grandma's voice broke the moment. "Sam, you remind me so much of your grandfather." And just like that, I knew every fight, every sleepless night had been worth it. The days after the reveal felt like stepping into a new rhythm, one I'd been writing in my head for years without realizing it. Grandma settled into her new home like she'd always belonged there. Mornings were slow and sweet. Tea on the patio, sunlight pooling over her quilt, the faint sound of jazz drifting from the music room. Sometimes she remembered every note of her favorite songs. Other times, she'd forget where she was, but the moment I started playing Trumpet in the Rain, her eyes would light up. And she'd hum along softly. My parents visited more often now. At first, they came out of guilt, bringing flowers and pastries like peace offerings. But over time, the visits stopped feeling like penance and started feeling like family again. Dad would sit in the lounge, leafing through Grandpa's old vinyl collection, asking questions about my songwriting process. Mom started helping me in the kitchen, chopping vegetables while I worked through melodies at the counter. Victoria, still the lawyer, still precise, surprised me most. She began asking for my advice on balancing work with life, and once, she even admitted she'd been jealous that I'd had the courage to chase my dream when she hadn't. Ethan brought his guitar on his second visit, sheepishly playing me a few original riffs. I didn't tell him, but I recognized the spark in his eyes. The helicopter rides became a tradition. Every Sunday, if the weather was kind, we'd take Grandma up over the Willamette River. The forests, the mountains. Sometimes she spoke, other times she just stared out the window, a small smile on her lips. I liked to think she was storing those moments somewhere deeper than memory, somewhere the illness couldn't reach. One evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat with Grandma in the music room. The sun had set, and the chandelier's light spilled across the polished floor. She reached for my hand. "Sam," she said softly, "you didn't just give me a house, you gave me my life back." Her words stayed with me long after she'd gone to bed. I realized then that the house, the helicopter, the millions of dollars, none of it was the real gift. The real gift was the belief I'd carried from the days under that cedar tree with Grandpa, that music matters, that dreams are worth the fight, and that the people who truly love you will come around, even if it takes time. My story wasn't about proving my family wrong anymore. It was about making sure Grandma's last years were full of beauty, sound, and light, the same way she and Grandpa had filled my childhood. As I closed the door to her room that night, I glanced at the trumpet gleaming in the corner. And I knew, without a doubt, that the song wasn't over yet.